Hello there and welcome to my early game guide for Songs of Conquest. I'm Icon, and in this video I'm going to talk about various different tips, tricks, and strategies to make your early game better and to help you to organize the things that you have to do in the first 10 or so turns to make your start a good one. So altogether we're going to explore many different things, and in the description box you will find timestamps to the different topics, so if you are curious to find them out now, go check it out. So with that out of the way, let's get started with one thing up ahead. This is an early access version video, and therefore many things will change. Also, I'd be super happy to have a lot of comments down there about your early game strategies, what you think about the things that I'm proposing here, maybe even some additions or whatever. I'd love to have more knowledge and you guys can share it here, and after a while I will be reworking this video, and there's a good chance that with your help the next one will be a lot better. I appreciate that. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get started. The first chapter is the first turn, because turn 1 is a really important phase in every game. You can't do a lot of things, and most of the things you will do in the first turn are decisions. You're technically not able to make that many different things. You can move your hero a bit and you can build one thing. But what's really important is to get an overview about your situation. Check out your wielder. Does he have some specialty? For example, here we have a ranged offense bias. That means we are probably interested in building our empire more towards a ranged army, because this wielder will most likely be the backbone of my strategy. If you selected your wielder specifically, not randomly like I did here, you will certainly have some ideas. Think about them, how you can realize them, what do you need for that, money, resource, and so on and so forth, and compare it with your environment. So as we see here, the most interesting things that you're looking for in the first turn are basic resources. Wood, stone are extremely important for your early expansion. They are basically the most important resources in the early game. The more rarer resources, Glimmerweave, Ancient Amber, and Celestial Ore, are not unimportant. That would be a wrong notion, but you're way more looking for these and some steady supplies of that as well. So judging on your situation, you will lay down your plans for turn 1 accordingly. What's also very interesting to look for in turn 1 are old camps. At old camps, you always get free troops or gold, but I love to use these to give my early game army a nice momentum to really be effective without waiting too long for those buildings to be finished and those creatures to spawn and so on and so forth. Another thing I like to look for in the first turn is, where are sources of knowledge? Are there already some visible? Sources of knowledge give you a free level up most of the time in the first few turns, and early game level ups are especially tasty. Some heroes have movement skills. Some heroes get better archery skills. For example, this hero gets, for example, better archery skill, and this might even help your early game conquest. So these sources of early experience make the combats easier, and they should be put into your plannings. And now the last thing that I want to talk about in the first turn is, think about how you want to make your roam. I really love to do this, and I think it's a very vital thing to do, that you think about how will you make your tour here. So your first session will always be like, I want to go and pick up everything that's for free here, and then pick up troops from the city to go for my first combat or whatsoever. So you gotta choose now. Is it stone or wood you want first? Do you want to go for the knowledge sources first, or do you want to go for the rarer resources first here? So make your decisions accordingly and then start roaming, so you're getting back to a full circle and you really get what you wanted. There is never a perfect turn 1. It'll always depend on your environment. on your starting resources, on your enemy, and so on and so forth. But training and making the best out of your first turn is really something that'll help you out getting better at your games, because the first turns are really the ones defining how good your footing in the later stages of the game will be. Okay, enough about turn one. Let's talk about buildings and building priorities. So when you're building stuff, you're always limited in two ways. First off, slots. Second off, resources. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but it's worth talking about. So you're going to have to think about, what do you build when? In situations like these, I see here 2 old campsites in my vicinity. I wouldn't stress myself out to build a troop building in the first turn right away. I'd say it's much more appealing to go either for a quarry or a lumber mill in the first turn and chill about that, because we're going to get enough free troops anyways. Since we can't see any income source of stone or lumber here in the vicinity, even better so. Your first buildings should always try to give you everything at once, but you can't realize that. But you want as much income in terms of resources and military as quick as possible. So choose what kind of industry you want to put up first. If you have a lot of free troops available, go for the resource production. If you don't have a lot of troops early on for free available, but a lot of resources, go for the troop production, and so on and so forth. You really need to compare this to your own situation, of course. And further on, when you're going for your building priorities, it's really important that you also think ahead in terms of what are you going to build from those medium buildings and when. So, for example, I can really already tell that this hero here wants those rangers ASAP. So we're going to consider that our medium slots would be preferably filled with barracks as quick as possible. So we're going to need extra stone. These things, you can already consider them up ahead, and you can do yourself a big favor by planning ahead. Also, if you ever have shortages, the marketplace is your friend. If you don't know what to go for your first medium building slot, the marketplace is always good to go, but more about that in a later chapter, when I'm going to talk more about the marketplace. Whatever might be the case, always keep in mind that the earlier you're building your troop buildings, the better, but don't build troop buildings at the cost of your resource production. This means if you can't put up a real good resource production because you've spent all your money or other resources for troops, don't do it. Keep in mind that your first and most important priority will be to upgrade this fortress as often and as quick as possible. So you'll need terribly large amounts of stone and wood, depending on your faction. These costs are not the same for each faction, so check them out. There's always a little bit of a different bias with these. And as you see here, low tier buildings need wood and here's wood. Well, sometimes they need different materials, but whatever might be the case, take that into your calculations. This is the most important thing, then the troops, then the resources. But the priorities can vary depending on your playstyle and on the situation. Okay, enough about that. I think you got the idea. It's really important that you think about when to build what, and that you think about what you're going to build the next 3 turns. This will help you a lot, especially in the early game when you want to plot down a building per turn and you really want to think about what to build when. Okay, so next topic on the list, extra wielders. So first off, there's lots of wielders that you can recruit. The cool thing, as you're hitting the 3rd level of your fortress, you'll get another slot for the wielders and you get another hero slot. I want to talk about this chapter because it's really important to me to stress out, go for these extra wielders. They are just amazing to have because they enhance your options, and there's a good reason why there's an upper limit for these. So you want to pick up somebody either You want somebody who's generating income for you. There's sometimes heroes that just have a skill like taxes, which you can just have in the backhand and do your kingdom jobs, collecting stuff that needs to be collected, and so on and so forth. Or you go for an alternative fighting force, then you should go for something that fits your taste in terms of skills and specializations. Wielders come either as fighters or mages mostly. You can distinct them between each other by looking at their specializations. Basically, every hero producing mana is supposed to be flagged as a caster. So, whatever might be the case, your extra wielders will be useful. When you've recruited them, let them go over all the sources of knowledge and the sources of power that give them experience and stat bonuses. And if you don't need them on the field, they can do different jobs for you. One of them I will discuss in a minute. And the other thing is that they will generate income for you. If you don't have any other job for them, just let them learn stuff that generates income. Let them wear the artifacts that generate income, so your main hero doesn't have his slots blocked by items that don't yield any combat bonuses. Whatever might be the case, fill out your extra wielder slots and check out what you need for your own strategy. Be it that you want to put all your eggs in one basket and have one mighty hero, or if you want to spread out your battle forces, this is really valuable and it's paying off in no time, because movement is one of the most limited resources in the game. So, the next thing that I want to talk about is when you're building your city, think well about what kind of troops you want to feature in for your hero. So there's a lot of different troops, and your heroes have a limited amount of troop slots that they can bring, and on every slot there can be only so many creatures of that type. And since you can even put the same creatures multiple times in your regimen, that means you can specialize your army quite hard. That means also you can't field all the troops that you have available here. So think ahead. Consider your hero, check out the roster you got here, and cherry pick what you want to. For example, the ranged hero here goes really well with the footmen, which happen to spawn at the same building as the rangers, and therefore you get a nice front line for your archers. You can use the minstrels for some support, and then you can just select if you're opting into some fae, into some knights. That's all up to you, but the most important thing is do your decisions and follow them through. In this game, it's easily done that you can also build, for example, 2 barracks and not a single fae growth, because you don't want these troops. You're not going to do yourself any favor by trying to recruit all the troops your faction has in the roster available in one gameplay, because you will end up with a thinned out variety of a party that's basically a jack of all trades but not really good at anything. So I personally really am an advocate for specialization, and these decisions are all made in the early game. That's why I'm putting this on the list. So think about what troops you want to have, and think about if it's worth it putting up the buildings for that doubly early on. For example, putting up 2 taverns early on so you have a sick minstrel spawn, or whatever. Just consider it. You can build multiples of these buildings, and it certainly does pay off. So, next thing that I want to talk about is a little nifty trick that you can use once you have several wielders. So, for example, if you want to move troops around, your cities can't spawn troops and troops can't move without wielders. But you can use your secondary wielders as troop transporters, because basically, for example, if my hero would just stand here and the other wielder would just walk down here with its troops, she would be able to keep moving after receiving fresh reinforcements. If you have more than 2 wielders, you might even start going for a courier chain, so to say, where in one turn you can transport troops in a distance equal to 3 heroes movement. That can be very, very powerful, and alone for that, it's worth putting up all the wielders that you can. I really wanted to feature this as a singular point because this is a massive strategy to get reinforcements into your front line without putting your front line away. Several wielders acting as a courier chain, that's a really cool thing. Now, next thing on the list is I want to talk about magic and how to pull it off and how to prepare it. So this hero here is not really any magic specialist, but as you see here, some heroes have this mana generation. So magic in this game is pretty simply explained. Your mana is generated either by the hero or the troops. Most of the time it's most of the mana generated by the troops. Every time a troop takes a turn, it's creating 1 point of mana regarding to its essences. So you see here, the minstrels are especially good at mana creation. They have 1 mana of creation and 1 mana of chaos. And if you have several stacks filled here, for example like that, you're creating double the amount of mana. So now I produce 2 order mana per turn because I have 2 different stacks activating at the same turn. This is really good for creating more mana, but keep in mind, whenever the enemy kills off a stack of yours, they get a moral bonus, so you want to use that carefully. If you are using small stacks just for the sake of mana generation, you have to protect them strategically, otherwise you're doing your enemy a quick favor. Beyond that, check out what kind of spells are interesting for you by checking out the troops that you have available. So before you start out your journey, you will, like I said, focus on certain troop types, and with that you'll see here, footmen create order mana. Rangers create lots of order mana too. Let's say we're opting into the knights, then we'd be creating more order mana and some chaos on the side. So our build would be compiled out of creation, chaos, and order mana, with a strong bias towards order, with an equal splash towards creation and chaos. So this means we're going to have access to these 3 columns and the mixed spells of these. Whatever you do, it's worth checking out these spells, because even if your hero is not talented in magic, all these spells will be available every combat for free. If you don't use that mana that's generated in the combat, it's just getting lost. You're not wasting anything if you're just putting up, even if it's weak spells, you're just putting them up here. Target friendly troop gets 10 defense. Just slap that on your melee dudes before they go into an attack and you reduce your losses. There's a lot of things you can do with these spells, and knowing what kind of troops you use beforehand enables you to check out what kind of spells are available for you and think about how they harmonize in your build plan. All in all, check out what kind of troops you will use, and you will know what kind of mana will be available for your hero, and you will know what kind of spells you can weave into your strategies. Since there are so many spells in the game to choose from, it might be worth checking out what's available for your hero and going into that. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is use your marketplace. The marketplace is amazing. The marketplace gives you access to all the resources the game has in store for you. The cool thing about that is you can buy every resource there or sell excess resources if you really want to, but most of the time I didn't need that. Most of the time I ended up with more gold than I needed and not the resources that I needed. The marketplace will help you there. Upgrading your buildings is quite important in this game. As you see here, the higher tier of the buildings yield better troops, and they all need those rare materials. At some point you will run out of these rare materials because you can't produce them quickly enough. Also, the marketplace gives you access to wood and stone in exchange for gold, so all in all, I think that if you're not following a specific strategy, building the marketplace on your first medium building slot is never a bad idea, especially since you can raise it and rebuild something else on the slot if you don't need it anymore and you receive 80% of the cost back. So the slot is not lost. If you want to use it for something else later, why not? But instead of building one troop building on that medium slot, for example, the barracks, and get a slow trickle of footmen and maybe rangers because you made the research somehow, which would be also quite costly, eating up your gold and your wood, you'd be still slow down when you want to upgrade the other buildings, or maybe you want to upgrade your quarries. That's also a pretty cool thing, needing amber too. Whatever might be the case, the marketplace is an insane speed up as long as you have the gold. And if you don't need it anymore, just sell it, because I've made the experience the longer the games went, the less I needed the marketplace. So it's a pretty cool thing to know. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say about the overworld map. The last part of this video will go a little bit into combat, so I'll see you guys there. Okay, so I allocated some troops, but one last thing before I head into combat that I actually missed mentioning. It's really important for you in this game to keep expanding. Whenever you're not expanding or collecting anything in your turns, you're basically giving your enemy an advantage. So plan accordingly to keep expanding. That's a very, very important rule in this game. So, let's get into combat. So, for this tutorial, I'll keep it very basic because I want to do an entire tutorial about combat. So here's a couple of general tips though that are really helpful. So whatever you might want to do, you always want to use those heightened terrain fields as much as possible. So you want to try to keep your to keep yourself close to these and try to get them as quick as possible, because you'll deal more damage from these sites and you will see that the AI is not playing too smartly around that. In a multiplayer session, it's the same. These are the points on the battlefield that you really would want to have. Although you gotta keep in mind that it is not that easy to get towards these. So whenever you're fighting a combat, two things are important. First off, keep the combat difficulty as close to easy as possible, and second off, keep your losses as minimal as possible. These are the two ground rules that you want to follow in each combat. Learning and mastering how to pull this off is, of course, a true art in itself, and that's why I can't put too much into that. But a couple of things that I personally found very helpful here. Never move your troops into the range of enemy archers if you don't have to. Let the enemy archers come to you, because they will give up ranged damage when they move. Sometimes it's really worth just waiting it out, because the AI has this wonderful tendency to just flat out murder itself by just stepping too much into your range. So another thing is, your troops have their movement, and after they move they can act, unless you use up their last step. So basically, if I only make one step forward, I get to act. If I make my last step, sometimes you get to act, but most melee units don't. So we're going to get a shoot here. And when you're fighting ranged units, it's always the most ungrateful thing in the history of gaming. Couple of advice, a few words of advice when fighting against other ranged troops. Try to get into their face as quick as possible. Binding them in melee is basically the easiest way of making sure that they won't hurt you anymore. And the other part is, if you're fighting against ranged enemies, keep in mind that you will always face losses in these phases. You can't change that. Also, pay more respect, like I did, to the zones of control. Move as little as possible when you are in the vicinity of your enemies. Therefore, plan where you enter the vicinity of the enemy. And whatever you lose, try to keep your losses at the lowest tiers. Try to preserve your units of the higher tiers, because these are usually where your power is at. As a rule of thumb, if you lose those tier 1 troops here, militia and minstrels, it's okay. If the losses are too high, ask yourself if you really did well. But if the losses felt unavoidable, it's often the case when you're fighting against ranged troops, and if you feel like you kept your other troops safe, well, then think about it harder how to realize how to reduce your losses even further. But most likely, you haven't done the worst thing. Sometimes it's even worth checking out certain enemies where you're like, nope, I'm not even bringing my most valuable troops to the field. It is very, very valuable to have a hero filled with trash units to just soak up the damage of units that inevitably decimate your troops. You want to keep your quality troops for the important fights. You don't want to lose them during the early game by clearing out some independent monster hordes. That's another thing where your secondary heroes can come in quite handy. As a general rule of thumb, melee stacks are always easier than ranged stacks because you can abuse your own ranged game a lot against these. Ranged units always bite back, and therefore you will always lose some troops. Keep that in mind, and you'll be able to plan your losses accordingly. Okay, that's all I wanted to lose in this video. I hope you found that helpful. Let me know in the comments what you thought about it. Let me know what kind of video you'd like to see as well here on the channel. And of course, leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed and consider subscribing. There's daily content coming up from my side. And there's also a Twitch channel, which you can find in the description box. I'd be super happy to see you guys there. So have a good one and enjoy. Bye-bye.